Okay, so the role of water in the US data center sector, I guess every data center sector, but we're talking about US specifically today, it's becoming just more and more critical. And I guess the sort of obvious new factor, if you like, is the AI data center expansion, fairly massive and rapid. So just your thoughts, I guess, as to how water's role, if you like, in the data center has become more critical over time.
Definitely. That's a great way to start here. Data centers, we've really seen this expansion and growth, and with that, they need to cool this IT equipment. And how do they do that? Primarily through water. So, Google, for example, their water use has increased, I believe it's something like 94% since 2020, nearly 30% just in the past year alone. So, we see the build out, billions of dollars of investment. It's really pushing up that water demand as these data centers need to be cooled. However, what is really interesting about the AI, this boom, is we're seeing real-time drastic improvements in cooling technology. So we're seeing Microsoft, for example, they've deployed their um, zero water data center, or they're piloting it in Arizona right now. They actually saw a reduction in year-over-year water use this past year, still higher than if we compare it to 2020, but definitely moving in the direction of water use. Amazon, we see they do a lot with reclaimed water, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So yes, with the build out related to these data centers, the growth of AI, there is a big water component, but it's not as exponential as previous due to these efficiency gains, and this new technology for cooling.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of the scale of the demand, I don't know whether the report you produced, does that sort of give people, I guess everyone's got some idea, but just how dramatic is this increase in data center capacity going to be in what I understand is a fairly short space of time?
Yes, so we do look at, okay, what are the new projects being planned? So we see the hubs in Virginia, for example, Texas, Arizona. These are going to continue to grow as investments are continuing to go in there. But we also see different areas spreading out a bit. Like Microsoft, they announced over 3 billion for Wisconsin. Meta, they announced over 10 billion in Louisiana. Google, they have a big investment in Indiana. So we're seeing this spread away from these hotspots. And that's been something interesting. And it kind of gets at the scale. Like they're building in these hotspots, but they're also spreading out just because they need to meet this demand. Something that we use to gauge, okay, what is this growth looking like is the value of construction put in place. So we use the launch of GPT as a marker here. So if you look at the construction put in place value, the 10 years prior, it's about 600 million per month that they're spending on data center construction. Now it's closer to 3 billion per month. So we've really seen a huge uptick in this, and that's just kind of one way that we gauge that.
Okay, and in terms when it comes to the sort of balance of power, if that's the right expression, between data centers and the folks that supply water, whether it's municipalities, etc., in who holds, I mean, are more water resources being developed by municipalities to cater for this data center expansion? Are data center builds being restricted, or they're going to different areas because of they need plentiful water supply? Any idea as to how that sort of tension, if you like, is being played out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is it really does depend on the location. So these data centers, they're very location specific. When a data center comes to town, they're really looking at power availability and reliability, and how it's going to connect to their network. That's their key drivers. And then they look to the water piece. So what's the existing water supply? So they go to the local utility. Most of these data centers, they are connected to the utility for their water supply. So then they ask the question, how can we secure a reliable water supply? Sometimes it's as easy as just building the pipe, connecting, paying the fee. Other times they are having to expand the capacity of that utility infrastructure that's in place. So they'll spend millions of dollars expanding capacity to allow for this. And then another thing is they'll also assess feasibility of using reclaimed water. So if that can be a reliable source of intake water, they'll use that. And I actually saw I was reading the news this weekend, and there was a developer down in Arizona, or not Arizona, sorry, Alabama. They're looking to have a big hyperscale facility go in, and the utility is like, okay, so the peak demand is going to be about 2 million gallons per day, whereas the supply that the utility has is about 6 million gallons per day. So that's about a third of their water supply. So they're saying, well, wait a minute, like we need to assess this. What's the supply going to look like? Something that's tricky with data centers is the seasonality of it. So you plan for peak demand, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be using that volume year round. So that's something that the community has to account for. A little outside of the US, but in Chile, we saw Google's water use permit a year or so ago got partially revoked by an environmental court because there was drought concerns and aquifer depletion concerns. So I think if we see more happening with drought concerns, scarcity concerns, we could see some issues come up about the supply. Right now, it is largely they go and see if the municipality can handle their demand.
Okay, but I mean, it's fair to say, is it, that there's sort of growing tension between digital infrastructure developers and the local water resilience is becoming more of an issue. I'm assuming as well, citizens perhaps get a little bit nervous when clearly the power, as you say, is one issue, but also from a water resource issue, citizens, local citizens are maybe getting a bit nervous as to what it means for them when a huge data center comes to town. Is that fair to say?
Definitely. So community backlash really does come with the territory of data center build out on many fronts, whether it's water use, power demand, even noise issues. So we see in Arizona a couple of different cities, they have ordinances out just to see how can we control this data center development. One of them is around the air or the noise pollution. Another is just about the jobs. So these data centers, they give a lot of jobs for construction, but then those level off a little bit once the data center is up and running. So that's not water specific explicitly, but we do see that these cities are trying to say, okay, how can we kind of taper this development a little bit and get more control over these data centers? Because the public is definitely, we see it in the news, they are advocating against having some of these data centers come in. It's that common theme of just not in my backyard. You don't want that big data center going up right across the street. I will point out though, on the flip side, so we see that in the US, utility infrastructure is largely underfunded. So these big data centers, they're coming in and they're spending millions of dollars to expand and upgrade these water systems. So that's a positive. So they can expand capacity for additional residents, other industrial expansions that might come down the line. And then also something that we're seeing too is these big tech companies, they're funding these offset projects, so water restoration projects in the community to help kind of buffer that backlash. And one interesting case that we've seen is Fido Tech, so it's a AI leak detection software. These big tech companies, they're giving this company money to basically go into the utility network and identify leaks and address those leaks. And then they're counting that towards their sustainability targets. So it's helping the network reduce the non-revenue water losses, and that's a positive, conserve water. Um, so there are pros and cons to it. So we do see backlash coming with it, but we also do see this rise of interesting projects that are coming in these communities.
Yeah, and I mean, alongside those, I guess the one of the main things the data center owners, operators are doing, you maybe say in the past that they were sort of passive consumers of water and that was that, but they're now sort of looking more active resource management. And I think you mentioned earlier, sort of reclaimed, recycled water is one of their preferred approaches. So is that gaining significant traction at the moment in the States.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're seeing for sure. There's been this push for sustainability, whether it's on the financing front. So we see a lot of sustainability linked financing to fund these data center expansions. But also, yeah, just to meet that community backlash with, okay, we're not going to take X millions of gallons of your potable water source. We're actually going to fund and improve your reclaimed water use system. And we see Amazon doing that. They're a leader in that. They just announced a goal. I believe it's over 120 sites that they're aiming to use reclaimed water for. And then also we see other companies, they have legacy data centers that use a lot of water. They use that evaporative cooling that's fairly water intensive. And they're turning to reclaimed water on a site-specific basis. It really does depend. Okay, does the utility have ability to do this? And is it feasible? We did see Microsoft a couple years ago in Quincy, Washington. They spent 30 million or so to fund a reuse facility that they're able to discharge their effluent to and have it reused. So there are some interesting things happening on that reuse front as these data centers are looking to mitigate their water footprints.
Okay, and I think maybe I'm remembering it from somewhere else, but it may be in the report. There was an example of given of is it Loudoun County in Virginia? Is that a particularly good example of what's going on?
Definitely. So they have an extensive reuse system in place that they are a hotspot for data centers globally. They have a lot of data centers packed in a small area. Makes sense geographically, proximity to Washington, a bunch of different factors there. So the utility has been expanding its reuse network. Companies like AWS, Equinix, they're expanding and utilizing this reclaimed water.
Okay, so in terms of the sort of investments being made, it sounds like there's a sort of three-pronged approach. So you've got the water utilities upgrading, expanding their facilities. You've got the on-site treatment to turn sort of wastewater back into usable water again, reuse, recycling. And then there's, I guess, AI, I don't know, other advanced technologies that can help enhance efficiency, resilience as well. Is there a winner out of those, or is it all things are sort of equally well um, addressed, shall we say? Yeah, how would you describe the balance between those?
Definitely. I would say that, yeah, there's these three big buckets of opportunity. So on-site, just improving the number of recirculation loops that they're using. There's different AI monitoring happening on site. We saw Digital Realty partner with Ecolab, I believe last year. Different meter expansion. So Microsoft, they spent over 1 million just on water meters to track water use. Google, they have their own like DeepMind AI to track cooling efficiencies. So that's been really cool to see like what's happening in these data centers to improve efficiency. And that's really interesting. Um, Sorry, did I freeze? On my perspective. But then also for the community, these private public partnerships where this big techs, they're funding these improvement projects for the infrastructure. That's also very interesting. The offsite restoration, that I feel is more to cushion that community backlash aspect of it. And there are real changes being happening there, but I do feel that on-site piece is most interesting to me.
Okay, I'm also wondering, in terms of what we've discussed and this sort of potential crisis around water usage for data centers. I mean, is that understanding that there is going to be this, or is already this move from air to liquid, or the sort of predictions might not be as would turn out to be as bad just because the liquid being used is used in a much more specific way compared to all the water that's used for air. So might we be if not panicking, might we be panicking more than we need to be, or is it still going to be a big water issue despite all this liquid cooling, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that we are seeing the shift to liquid cooling, and it is much more efficient. So it's a more direct heat transfer. And this big push to take a step back is happening because AI and these more advanced applications, they require higher server densities, increased workloads. So you have more heat generated. So we need more efficient heat transfer to cool the equipment. So that needs to be optimized. So we've seen direct to chip cooling, immersion cooling, where the coolant, so it's normally like a water glycol mix, that's being used in direct proximity to the IT equipment instead of having that fan that's going to air cool it. That shift away from the traditional like air cooling of the chips, um, like your evaporative cooling, swamp cooling. It's definitely more efficient. You're going to have your lower water use intensity, which we've seen over time. These big companies, they're reducing their intensity. It can be used in a closed loop more easily. So we're seeing Microsoft's pilot in Arizona, they're having a closed loop system. They're able to just recycle that coolant again and again. And it's really bringing down their water demand. So I've talked to a lot of people in the industry looking at water, and it really varies what that outlook looks like. So with new technology, there can be a bit of a lag because of high capex, lack of trust in different technologies, but we are really seeing this drive for liquid cooling, which we have it calculated into our model as it takes off and doesn't level off the water use requirements of these data centers, but definitely it's going to be lower as compared to the past 10 years or so.
Okay, and one other thing just occurred to me. I know, I think it's in Portugal, company there, they're using seawater, and clearly that comes with problems because of all the salt content. But is that something that is being used or looked at in the US? Clearly, if you're in the middle of, I don't know, the Midwest, it's probably not that handy. But if you're near the coast and have a data center, is that becoming a tool of interest to companies?
Yeah, we've definitely seen that as an intake water source in certain cases. It is definitely something with data centers. It's all site to site specific. So what's feasible for this facility? So right now, largely it is potable. They're connecting to the municipality where there's a sufficient supply. If there's a reuse network or they can build one fairly easily, they're doing that just because they're trying to deploy these data centers as quick as possible. And they don't quite want that water piece to slow them down. However, in areas where there is supply concern, they're evaluating alternative methods, and they do have that capital to fund some of that seawater project. So definitely something we're seeing just on a case by case basis, not widespread, but definitely something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and I would suppose that in sort of summarizing, I guess the data centers have to sort of balance technical innovation, operational sustainability. But I'm interested, as I say, everyone thinks of data centers as power hungry and maybe doesn't understand quite how water hungry they are as well. Do you think the water issue will become or could become, if not sort of addressed properly, as serious as the power? I mean, as the last time I looked at an event, the gap between capacity, planned capacity and power availability, was getting bigger and bigger. Is that like, could that happen with water as well if people don't address it, or will power always be the biggest problem compared to water?
Yeah, we definitely see power just as this tier one concern, I would say. They need available power, reliable power, and they use a lot of it because their data center needs to be powered 24/7. And that's also something, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll get back to your question in a minute. That power demand aspect of it. There is also water correlated with that that's important to discuss. Power is the highest water using industry. And as your power demand goes up and more power needs to be generated to meet the demand of these data centers, you have a lot of indirect water use. So although it's a lot of the water is being used once through for cooling and then discharged right back out to the surface body water that they're using at these power plants, it is something to consider that if you look at the whole water footprint of the data center and you look at power, there is the water component there as well. But if we look again, just okay, what's that direct water piece? It is really fascinating to see the advancements in technology and the deployments that are happening in real time. And I think this innovation is really helping with that demand, that water demand. So these data centers, they're getting smarter, they're getting more efficient, they're really leveraging some cool digital applications to track their water use and optimize it, as well as using closed loop, more cycles, using reclaimed water. Water use intensities have been going down pretty consistently year over year for these companies. And like I mentioned, although Google, their water use has gone up a lot this past year, Microsoft has gone back down to around 2022 levels. So it is definitely something to evaluate on a company by company basis. What technologies are they adopting? How does that match the rate of their build out and the cooling systems that they're deploying? So I think that the water topic is definitely still super relevant with data centers. But I also do think that um, it it's being addressed in some cool, innovative ways by these data center companies.
And maybe just finally, promise, because you give me some plenty of your time. In terms of the data centers sort of approach to sustainability in general, are most of them aware of and interested in their sort of total supply chain footprint? As you alluded, obviously there's a lot of water used, to create the power that they use, etc. Are they increasingly concerned and addressing those issues, or are they very much still, will only focus on what happens sort of within the walls of the data center, or at least very close by, or are they becoming more aware of and acting as to their wider carbon footprint, if you like?
Yeah, we do see on the carbon side of things that is the case where they look across their supply chain a little more so than the water piece. At the water piece, they're like, okay, this is how much water we withdrew, this is how much we consumed. So from what I've seen, it's a little more on-site specific, like how like the direct piece of it. They do use renewable energies as to supplement or offset some of that power use, and that has a lower water footprint. So there are different projects that they're taking. Widespread, though, I would say, from at least my perspective, it is a little more focused on that direct water use at this time. Um, but I could see it going more like we've seen with food and bev companies, for example. They're really starting to look at, okay, what's that supply chain? Um, what's our water footprint of the supply chain? How can we help these where we're sourcing our raw inputs from? How can we help this irrigation be smarter? So that would be something that would be great to translate to the data center space. And it could be happening, but from at least what I've seen, it's a little more, okay, what's our direct water use and how can we secure our power source?
Okay, I mean, it's been brilliant to chat, and you shared some fascinating insights into what's going on. It's a fast-moving uh, industry, and I'm sure there'll be more to discuss at a later date. But at least for now, it's been brilliant to chat again. So, Amber, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.